Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. It's the eve of the anniversary of the death of Elizabeth II. She was the link between the old and the modern world. Her premierships began with Churchill and ended with Liz Truss. Her reign spanned 7 decades. She embodied so much that is good about the United Kingdom: duty, dignity, determination. She united the nation and made reigning look easy, which it almost certainly wasn't. Tonight, we'll be discussing her legacy. Today, it's reported the Prime Minister is shelving the ban on social gender transitioning in schools. And this coincided with the revelation that new staff guidance at Great Ormond Street Hospital has advised staff not to use terms such as boys and girls. We have to push back on this woke agenda. Civil disobedience is rife, but no, this time it's not the Just Stop Oil Brigade, the Stonewallers or Black Lives Matter activists, it's the motorists. A police investigation has suggested some 2 million motorists could be doctoring number plates to dodge ULEZ and speeding fines. Ultimately, we are governed by consent, and that consent may be breaking down. Plus, a drug you've probably never heard of was given to pregnant women in the 1960s and 70s and led to children being born with severe disabilities. It's not thalidomide, it's Primodos. And today, the House of Commons discussed this enduring cover-up. State of the Nation starts now. I'll be joined by an incisive panel this evening, author and trade union activist Paul Embry and the former editor of Labour List, Peter Edwards. As always, I want to hear from you. It's a crucial part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now it's time for the news of the day with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Jacob, and good evening. Our top stories tonight. More than 150 counter-terrorism officers are working around the clock in an effort to locate escaped terror suspect Daniel Khalifa. GB News sources have confirmed that he's accused of spying for Iran. The Met Police say a lack of sightings of Khalifa is testament to his ingenuity as a soldier. Meanwhile, the Met Police has released an image of the bid-food vehicle it's believed he used to escape, and security checks have been tightened at ports. Despite the incident, the Prime Minister says there's been fewer prison escapes under the Tory government.
There are something like 4,000 more prison officers than there were in 2017. And with regard to the Labour Party who posed the question, again, the facts show that during their 13 years in office, there were 10 times the number of escaped prisoners than you've seen in the 13 years of Conservative-led government. But we're doing everything we can to find this person. And as I said, if anyone has any information, please do contact the police.
Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says the government is totally at fault.
I think we now know there were already some pretty damning reports into Wandsworth, issues about staffing, issues about buildings, and that's a pattern of behaviour now under this government, whether it's this prison or other prisons or other infrastructure across the country. And it certainly hasn't helped that in the last 10 years we've had 10 justice secretaries, and I know from my time as Director of Public Prosecutions just how important stability is when it comes to criminal justice.
A police investigation is being launched into dozens of baby deaths and injuries at Nottingham University Hospital's NHS Trust. More than 1,700 families were part of an independent review of maternity care at NUH, which was led by Donna Oakenden. The senior midwife led a similar investigation at the Shrewsbury and Telford Hospital NHS Trust. The Prime Minister is facing another by-election following the resignation of his former Deputy Chief Whip, Chris Pincher. The MP for Tamworth made the decision after losing an appeal against an 8-week suspension over groping allegations. In a statement, Mr Pincher said he didn't want uncertainty for his constituents. He sent his resignation letter to the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt.
This was a situation that needed to be resolved, and now we know the way forward, and we will put forward a very strong candidate from the Conservative Party who will help attract investment, jobs to Staffordshire and to the wider region, and that's what we'll be campaigning on.
And finally, the UK is rejoining the European Union's £85 billion science research programme Horizon. The move follows months of negotiations with a bespoke agreement signed off with the EU. Researchers will be able to apply for grants to take part in Horizon projects until the programme ends in 2027. The UK had been excluded from the scheme because of a disagreement over the Northern Ireland Protocol. This is GB News across the UK on television, in your car, on your digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying, play GB News. Now let's get straight back to Jacob.
Catholics will know that tomorrow is the feast of the birthday of the Blessed Virgin, but it's also, perhaps more widely known in the United Kingdom, the first anniversary of the death of Elizabeth II, the longest reigning monarch in our history. And naturally, last year, what everyone wanted to talk about was essentially a hagiography of the late Queen. Her virtues were discussed and talked about, and it was almost viewed as inevitable that her reign would have been a success. When you look back over the period from 1952 to 2022, it wasn't always plain sailing. There were two marvellous periods. The Queen, as a young, beautiful woman, when she came to the throne, was adored not just by her people, by people across the world. And then, as a dutiful, frail, elderly lady, we were inspired by her commitment to her people and her continuing to fulfil her role into vast old age, when other people had long since retired. But there were periods of tumult. That the 1970s weren't a great decade for the monarchy, and the 1990s were even harder. That was when the Queen had the annus horribilis, and when, of course, Diana, Princess of Wales, died. And at that point, people did question the constitutional monarchy. But the thing to remember is that this is what you would expect. If you look at the reign of Queen Victoria, she had 7 assassination attempts, and her reign went in a similar pattern to the late Queen. Popular when she was first Queen, not lasting very long, not lasting as long as it did for Queen Elizabeth, very popular again at the end of her reign as the mother of the empire, but in between times, there were periods when she wasn't at all popular. Indeed, at one point, there was even a suggestion that Albert should be taken to the Tower for treason. So all reigns have periods when they aren't going as smoothly as the monarch would like. And to succeed, they need to go with the grain of the political nation. And this has been the amazing success of the British monarchy since George I became king, that they have understood the need, or they found by force majeure, that they have lost their power to become constitutional monarchs. But being a constitutional monarch is harder than you think. Why? Well, if you are a powerful ruling monarch, if you think of the Wars of the Roses, the idea then was to change a monarch for another monarch. Now it's either a constitutional monarchy or it's a republic. There isn't another family, there isn't another dynasty that would take over. And that puts great pressure on the constitutional monarch and the family to maintain it, particularly when they've got residual constitutional powers. These are really interesting and important. And you have to wonder how different the political nation may have been in relation to the prorogation example, which I was involved with, had instead of it being a very elderly queen, had it been a younger king, would people have expected him to have been involved more? Or when we had the coalition in 2010, the coalition was very interesting because the one aim of all the politicians was to protect the Queen, not to bring her into politics. Actually, Gordon Brown didn't have to stay in Downing Street for an extra week. He could have left. And he could have said it's up to the constitutional monarch to work out who the next Prime Minister should be, throwing the political problem firmly on the lap of the sovereign rather than dealing with it in the political field. So the question for the future is, can the constitutional monarchy continue to work? And we've all seen how brilliantly the king has done in his first year, the steadiness, the dignity, the clear affection that he has for his people and his desire to make it work properly, and the humour that he's brought to it, not to mention the great support that he gets so obviously from Queen Camilla, from the current Queen. It's been a fantastic start, but will it be able to go through the squalls which will come? Will the path set by the late Queen continue? I very much hope so, because I think it's a fundamental part of the fabric of our society. I think it is what marks us out as a unique, as a great, as a noble nation. It is what unites the United Kingdom. The monarchy is at the heart of it. But it's harder to keep it going than perhaps the late Queen made it look. As always, I want to hear from you. Don't forget to let me know your thoughts. You know the email off by heart by now, even though the teleprompter writer doesn't. It's mailmog@gbnews.com. I'm delighted to be joined now by Michael Cole, former BBC royal correspondent, the man who incidentally was with me during GB News' coverage of the coronation.
Indeed.
Michael, there are challenges, aren't there? The King's done very well so far. I think the big challenges are constitutional. How does a constitutional monarch deal with the problems when they touch politics? But are there others that you think may arise?
There was a famous Italian nobleman, Giuseppe de Lampedusa, and he wrote a book called The Leopard, which was made into a rather good film. And he wrote in his book, things have to change so that they stay the same. And over the centuries, the British monarchy has evolved. It's almost unrecognisable from what it was at the time of Queen Victoria. And she made some changes, and she had to. And every occupant of the throne has. And the Queen did change. I mean, in the 1950s, Lord Altrincham came out and said she sounded like a prissy little schoolgirl when she spoke, so she changed her voice. The 1960s, the skirts went up to miniskirts. Well, hers went up to just about the knee. She changed, and as the Union Jack came down around the world, she embraced the Commonwealth. That was her big cause. It wasn't just a nice place to go for a holiday in the winter. She really believed in that. She put her heart and soul in it. And she did very well. And what she did more than anything was to give a fantastic example to her eldest son. Now, I'll admit, I was never his greatest fan when he was Prince of Wales. But in the first year, he has hardly put a foot wrong. The Accession Council, the first televised speech, the Christmas speech, the state visit to Germany, the first state visit to Germany, I thought the coronation was overproduced and under-magicked. I thought the spirituality wasn't there. The further we move away from our Catholic origins, the less spirituality there is. And I think we saw that. And I was disappointed with that because I know that he took a great deal of interest in how it would be perceived by people. Now, he has got to do different things. The good thing about it, Jacob, is that I've observed him. I'm 5 years older than him. I've been observing him all my life. At primary school, I bought national saving stamps for ½ a crown, which had his picture on them. So I've been writing stories about him. The ones for Princess Anne were only sixpence, OK? But the half-crown ones were the ones for the heir to the throne. And I first wrote my royal story about him in 1961.
But in a way, the first year is likely to be an easy year because you have that huge groundswell of goodwill from the death of the Queen. You also have the heir being that much younger than the incumbent, and therefore, inevitably, he's carrying out many more functions than the Queen was able to do in the last few years of her life. So he seems to be a more active king. What do you think happens next year? Where do the surprises come from that are there to trip him up? Would it be, say, the next election leads to a hung parliament? Does that make it difficult, or is that all going to be sorted out by
Well, it's good to think about that. He hasn't put a foot wrong politically, which is good. He's said all he's had to say about political issues. We know where he stands. He doesn't have to repeat that. And the interesting thing that I've observed is that I've never seen him so happy, so content. He seems to be comfortable in his own skin for the first time. He waited more than 70 years for his inheritance. He had a longest apprenticeship in history.
In history, yes.
In history. And now, with the woman he loves, who he's been married to longer than he was married to Princess Diana, he's very relaxed. And obviously he knows it's going to be a short reign, but a short reign can be a very successful reign. Edward VII, his great-great-grandfather, only 9 years, was a hugely successful reign, gave his name to the Edwardian era, which people looked back on and thought was a golden age.
Everyone adored Edward VII because he was fun after Queen Victoria had been very dour.
Yes. Edward the Caresser. he had so many.
Yes, fun
so many
may have been a euphemism.
Well, he did what the British people liked. He ate and he drank and he fornicated. I mean, that's what he did.
Well, and people love Charles II too, but Charles III isn't going to behave in this way.
No.
He's much more dignified than that. But I think you're right. The popularity is likely to be there for the new reign. But how does he square the circle of our desire to have a grand and majestic monarchy with a cost of living crisis? That there are these constraints, aren't there? And you saw that a bit in the coronation.
Yeah, I agree with you. And what is interesting, polls can tell you a certain amount, but they don't always tell you the truth. But they do reveal that 2/3 of the population are still behind the monarchy. There's good reason for that, because, as you said, the constitutional monarchy, which is the Westminster pattern, which we've exported successfully around the world to New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and other of the 14 other realms of King Charles III, is a very successful formula. It's unique in this country. We don't have a written constitution. That means it's flexible. We don't have to go through what the Americans do when they want to change their constitution.
It's very difficult.
Very difficult.
Do you worry about the realms? Does that matter for the monarchy in the United Kingdom?
I think he will take the attitude that his mother took. When any member of the Commonwealth wanted to be a republic, she accepted it, didn't welcome it, but accepted it, and quite rightly so. She didn't go when the flags were hauled down into these colonies. A lesser member of the royal family, quite often Prince Charles, went. But she accepted that, and she wanted them to be within the Commonwealth as a republic. There are 43 monarchies in the world. There are 149 republics. The monarchies tend to be the happier lands. Could I prove that to you? Would you allow me? Let me ask...
I don't think we've got time to prove it, but I think Shakespeare said something about us being a happy land. Thank you, Michael. Don't forget to let me know what you think. mailmog@gbnews.com. Coming up, why won't the government legislate to protect children from social gender transitioning? Plus, has the war on the motorist alienated the consent of the majority?
This September, the GB News family is back together. From breakfast right across the day, breaking the latest stories and every evening. And don't forget the weekend. We've got the whole of the UK covered. Every week, we'll be hearing your views from up and down the country with fun, lively and intelligent conversation with the biggest guests. This September, we'll meet Chris and John. Thank you for choosing GB News. We're proud to be Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, nah, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Alan. Great monologue, Jacob. Thank you, Alan. She was a fantastic monarch, and you're absolutely right about her legacy. Ben, big fan of what you're saying, boss. Long live the king. Sentiments we should all share. The government is apparently thinking of dropping plans to ban children from changing their gender while still at school. While no decision has yet been confirmed, it's expected legislation to tackle the matter will not be included in the King's speech expected in November. The failure to protect children has been compounded today by a memorandum from Great Ormond Street Hospital advising staff to stop using gendered language, or else people may feel, quote, triggered, unquote. Well, I think the only thing that's been triggered is a wave of mirth as we observe the latest development in wokedom. However, on a note of less levity, the failure of the government will be a failure of the duty to safeguard children. Allowing those in school to wear the opposite sex's uniform or demand they called by their chosen pronoun sets a dangerous precedent. A paper from Policy Exchange revealed a number of schools were even failing to tell parents that pupils had been questioning their gender identity. I hope that the government sees sense and chooses to follow up on the Prime Minister's promise to tackle transitioning in schools. I'm joined now by my panel author and trade union activist, Paul Embry, and the former editor of Labour List, Peter Edwards. Peter, first of all, the Great Ormond Street Hospital saying you can't say boys and girls in a staff document, doesn't this actually risk offending the vast majority of people who are quite happy to be boys and girls?
I'm not sure it offends them, but I mean, as a parent, as I know you are as well, the primary duty of Great Ormond Street is to provide good quality care for children who are sick. So I want them to spend most of their time on that, and I'm sure they are. But then also someone, Jacob, who's very skilled with the English language. Language depends on context. So I think it's right that hospitals show sensitivity. If you're a doctor, you only tend to meet people when they're in distress. You don't meet people when they're fine. So it's right to show that care. But most folk will be happy to be called Mr. and Mrs. boys and girls. But it's right to show that flexibility for the very small number of children. We think it's, fewer than 0.5% who go through such issues.
I don't dispute that, but it's when you have a staff document saying you shouldn't use gendered terms, that means that the 99.5%, or possibly slightly more, are then not being referred to in a way they would be most comfortable being referred to. And they'll think this is a little bit odd. It's like calling mothers a birthing parent, which most mothers don't want to be called.
It seems like it's going a little bit too far, and there's obviously a much broader range of issues, as your intro showed, about how we treat children, especially that face issues around their gender. But I think I have a slight worry, which is about formal guidelines. And you see this with local authorities and the police across country. Formal guidelines are very difficult to enforce because any doctor or nurse working under time pressure, cost pressure and emotional pressure will use the best words they think in the moment that show the most care to the family. So edicts like this, however well-intentioned, maybe don't always have the desired effect.
Just put more pressure on people working under pressure environment. Also, the government's lack of willingness to do anything about schools. Don't schools need some help, some clear guidelines, possibly even some legislative guidelines, to know how to deal with these issues when they arise?
Well, I think there's always been a bit of a myth, Jacob, I have to say, that the Tories are, if you like, anti-woke. They're the party that we can rely on to tackle the extremes of wokery. And I have to say, look, who's been in power for the last 13 years? The reality is it's the Tory party who's been in power, during which time much of this agenda has been adopted and embraced by our public institutions, our corporations and so on. And it seems to me that whenever push comes to shove, so on a story like this, for example, in terms of schools not giving kids the right to change their gender, as soon as it becomes a little bit controversial, the Tories will back off and think, actually, that will present us possibly as the nasty party again, and we don't want to be seen to be unkind and uninclusive. But the truth is that the vast majority of the public do not support this agenda. And people in power, people in positions of power, have got to understand that when they peddle this sort of stuff, they are out of touch with mainstream Britain. That's the truth of it.
Well, I completely agree with that. I mean, I think if you came with me to my constituency in North East Somerset and we knocked on doors, the overwhelming majority of people would wonder why on earth we were talking about this, let alone being in favour of children turning up at school one day saying they were a girl, the next day saying they were a boy. And also the protection of children's thing I'm most concerned about, that children do think of things when they're little, and if you then insist that because one morning they've thought, oh, I'm going to say I'm a girl, that must be how they're dressed and so on, you risk solidifying something that was just a passing fancy of a child.
And we have to also accept that there's a large element of social contagion involved. Kids respond to each other, they play off of each other's ideas, they like to be with the zeitgeist. And children, if they've got a friend who's, changed their particular gender, and it's deemed to be quite a fashionable and progressive thing to do, the chances that they may do it, I think, increase. But I think when you look at the broader picture and the fact that in this country, and I'm on the left and, I've been all of my adult life, but I look at it coming from a working class community and I think, look, age-old social and cultural norms are changing very rapidly in this country, and quite often in a way that people out there, ordinary Britain, is very, very uncomfortable.
That, I think, is crucial.
And the people at the top of our society are not getting that.
I think that's a fundamental point, because I think the norms appear to change, but they're only changing at the top. That actually the bulk of the country hasn't gone along with this at all, has never bought into it, and there's no polling evidence that they have.
Well, I think it was ever thus, the idea that there's change. Change has always been with us, but I'd really challenge the idea there's one set of British values. You know, it's affected by all sorts of things: class, gender, geography, income, what part of the country you're in. But just to go back to this point about what's happening in schools, we've got to be clear with viewers, social transitioning, we're not talking about medical procedures.
Yes.
We're talking about names, pronouns, school uniforms, for example. So I think there's barely time to cover it, but I think we'd all agree parents must have total visibility and consent to what's happening in their children's lives, especially around such issues. But I also think there's got to be support for children. It's tough enough being a teenager. If you've got gender dysphoria, that's even tougher. I'd challenge you a bit on using the phrase passing fancy. I think that underplays the severity of it. But I'd also challenge Rishi Sunak, because I think his team briefed out something a couple of months back about changing the law. They've now changed their minds. And I think that shows what Rishi Sunak has been trying to do, which is play to his backbenchers rather than speak to the public.
When I said passing fantasy, I was thinking of littler children, the primary school children, rather than secondary school, for whom it may be a really difficult part of adolescence. I don't disagree with what you say. And I also think, as a sort of final word, that you have to treat everybody sympathetically, even if you think they're doing something that isn't necessarily in their best interests. But you're absolutely right. Parents have to know. You can't keep it secret from parents. Thank you very much to my panel. A spokesman for the Great Ormond Street Hospital said, "We want all of our staff at GOSH to feel welcome and included at work in an environment that respects them for who they are, as well as the job they do. Anyone discriminating against any other individual on the basis of race, gender, sexuality, or any other protected characteristic will be addressed via our official dignity at work policy." Really, that's such awful guff, I'm sorry to say. I normally read out these things seriously, but that doesn't tell you anything. And lots of people who are quite happy to be boys and girls, and parents, particularly mothers who like to be called mothers, will think that's frightful rot. Coming up, the latest bout of civil disobedience comes from unusual suspects, plus a decades-old medical scandal.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes, and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio, and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Another warm night to come overnight with elevated temperatures for the time of year. More hot sunshine to come then into Friday. Not for everyone. There is a fair amount of medium and high-level cloud around, and there are some showers drifting north across Scotland and Northern Ireland overnight. Most of the rain not reaching the ground. These are relatively high-based showers, but could see some flashes of lightning as that clears away. Then for most places it's dry with clear spells, some low cloud creeping into the east coast. But wherever you are, it's a warm night. A muggy feel, 18, 19, 20 Celsius in the south, mid to high teens in the north. And that sets us off for a warm start to Friday. Still some of that low cloud and mist around the east coast, but it tends to retreat during the morning to the immediate beaches. And there'll be some low cloud creeping around the southwestern coast as well, with the potential for some showers to turn up later here. Otherwise, for many, it's bright skies and another hot day. Mid to high 20s widely, 30 or 31 Celsius in the south and southeast. Then into Saturday, it's another warm start to the day. Plenty of sunshine from the word go, especially towards the east and the south. A change on the way, though, for the north and northwest. Northern and western Scotland see some showers and some cooler air later. That spreads across the northern half of the country on Sunday, clearing elsewhere on Monday.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Judith, what's the response going to be when people end up dying while they waste time in hospitals making up their minds what sex a person is? And Brian, schools should not allow children to change their own gender, but provide support if parents express they may be confused about it. Brian, I think that's a very reasonable point. Now, breaking the law is wrong, but we are governed by consent. And it may be that the war on the motorist is breaking that consent. A police investigation has revealed that an estimated 2 million people could be doctoring their number plates to avoid ULEZ and speeding fines. Apparently, on the internet, you can buy fake number plates for as little as £10. This is straightforwardly illegal, don't be any doubt about that. But you can also buy what is known as reflective stealth tape that makes the plates invisible to ULEZ or speeding cameras. Perhaps the breakdown of consent is coming because the laws are too onerous. When you repeatedly make motorists' lives more difficult by forcing them to pootle along at 20 miles an hour on an empty road in the middle of the night, or indeed impoverish them by charging them £12.50 every day for driving an older vehicle, is it surprising that this leads to civil disobedience, which is nonetheless criminal? Apparently the Home Secretary is under pressure to tackle this problem, but I have a feeling she may be rather busy with the migrant crisis first. Anyway, who better to discuss this with than Nick Freeman, Mr. Loophole himself, the motoring law expert. Nick, thank you as always for joining me. It's very clear, isn't it, that putting on somebody else's number plate or a number plate that has the letters the wrong way around is straightforwardly illegal. What about putting a see-through cover that doesn't distort the numbers and letters for ordinary vision but does for cameras? Is that legal or illegal?
Illegal. If you tamper with your number plate in any respect to try and avoid the consequence of going through a camera or attempting to the court, and if you're caught, you will be interviewed, you'll be charged, and you can expect a custodial sentence.
So it's a really stupid thing to do because you go from a risk of 3 points or a modest fine to potentially a jail sentence if you muddle with your number plate to avoid justice?
Absolutely. I mean, you may recall the case of Chris Hume and his wife who just lied about who was driving. It was a straightforward three-pointer, and they both went to prison. So I think people don't realise how serious number plate tampering or being dishonest in relation to simple matters such as who was driving is. The courts deal with it very strictly because basically we are reliant on robotical policing now, and the public are expected to go along with it. And in my view, obviously, it will be extremely foolish for anyone to tamper with a number plate because they're going to land themselves eventually in very deep water. The authorities will catch up with them.
But this is the problem, isn't it? That it seems as if the law has become so draconian that the consent for it is breaking down, that whereas 30 years ago, before there were speed cameras, this didn't happen. People accepted that if they were stopped by the police, if they were pulled over, it was essentially fair. But with hundreds of thousands of fines being issued automatically, with no real court process involved, aren't people beginning to think that it is no longer fair and that the government by consent is crucial to a law-abiding society?
Yes, you're absolutely right. It used to be perceived as fair game. And of course, if you were stopped for speeding, 30 years ago or even less than that, an officer would exercise his discretion and you may get a warning. And you drive off having been given that warning, and you tend to drive carefully for some time. Now it's robotical. The cameras are literally everywhere. As you say, the speed limits are coming down to a level which the motorist doesn't really understand. And then when you couple that with ULEZ, congestion charges, and then couple that with the fact that we are living in largely a decriminalised society, unless you're a motorist, the motorist feels, I think, now that it's going or it's gone too far, and they're beginning to resist the law. They're beginning to take the matter into their own hands because they say it's too much.
Thank you so much for joining me. I've still got my panel with me, author and trade union activist Paul Embry and the former editor of Labour List, Peter Edwards. Paul, I thought what Nick was saying is his very last point, is that we are becoming a decriminalised society. Yesterday we discussed shoplifting, and it seems you can get away with shoplifting. The only people left who ever get caught is the poor old motorist. So it's not surprising that the motorist who, in most cases, in all other ways law-abiding, is getting pretty fed up with this.
I mean, I'm not particularly a car fan. I have a car. I am a motorist. I don't particularly like cars. I don't think our country is particularly designed for so many of them. But nonetheless, I am concerned over schemes like ULEZ, which are, during a cost of living crisis, in the midst of a cost of living crisis, come as a real financial punishment to people. So I think the timing is pretty poor, even though it's a Labour mayor who's done it. Because people are at the moment kind of struggling to make ends meet. And the other point is, unless you have a public transport system worthy of the name, so where people can feel comfortable about travelling on public transport, it's cheap, it's reliable, it's efficient. We don't have that. We don't have it in London, we don't have it anywhere.
And we're never going to have it in places like North East Somerset, that in rural areas there is no way of having an affordable public transport service.
Well, I mean, we can go back to the beaching cuts, can't we, in the 1960s and the impact of that on the country, and arguably you're probably right, that kind of thing isn't going to be reversed. But I certainly think we can do better than we're doing in terms of a public transport system, because if people felt that they were able to get from A to B, whether they're commuters or whatever, and to do so cheaply and quickly, I think more people would do it. But they don't have trust, so therefore they feel forced to get in their cars and being punished for it.
Peter, at the heart of this, I think, is the question of justice. That, as I was discussing with Nick, that if you were pulled over by a policeman, you thought that was fair and there was discretion. But when it becomes completely automated, there's no ability to find out whether what was happening was reasonable or not, whether it was excessive. And it does begin to look like just an extra tax rather than really being a safety or a crime-related measure.
I do think so. Speeding tends to be pretty black and white, for example. There's little ambiguity about speeding. I think there's two issues here. One is around consent and the undermining of law and order. And I understand the points Nick Freeman made, but we've also got to take account of the fact of austerity and the closing of several hundred police stations since 2010 in weakening public support and faith in law and order. But to go to you, Les, you used the word justice, which is very interesting, because I think although we're all on different sides of the political spectrum, justice is what kind of drives our engagement in politics. ULEZ, to me, however unpalatable, is a social good, it's socially just. And my worry was that the mitigation, which was a scrappage scheme, was not enough. And then after the Uxbridge by-election and a few words from Keir Starmer, Sadiq Khan, the London mayor, came out of a larger scrappage scheme, put another £50 million into it. There's a bigger economic mitigation for the people affected. But ULEZ is a moral good. We have to remember a little girl died and had air pollution named on her death certificate. And that's why I firmly believe in it. But
the statistics on ULEZ show that the extension will make virtually no difference. If I remember rightly, it's 0.1% of particulates and 1.4% of nitrate oxides.
Yes, but that's a projection, first of all, and we don't know about demographic change in future. And I would defy anyone to argue against measures to improve air quality in London. Because it will get worse.
Proportionality, surely
it's about proportion, isn't it? You know, when you look at net zero, for example, we can all be environmentalists, and I'm as green as anybody, and I don't like pollution, and I wish the air was cleaner. But there comes a point where you think, actually, politicians are just preening, they're just posturing. They know, actually, the impact is going to be minimal, but they want to be able to strut on the domestic stage and the international stage and say, look, you know, we're complying with the green agenda, aren't we wonderful, progressive people? There's a hell of a lot of posturing going on in this debate.
I would...
You know that.
All politicians like posturing to a certain extent, Jacob, if you forgive me for saying, but it's evidence-based. The Times, which, you know, is the Times newspaper, is not a woke, socialist, cheese-eating surrender monkey like I'm perceived as. But the Times did an investigation...
Fairly liberal, progressive paper.
The Times did an investigation on air quality, so data-led, showing children growing up in the inner city had smaller lungs. It wasn't just they had a bit of a cough or the air was a bit nastier. Their lungs were smaller in the inner city in London because of air quality. And that was by the Times newspaper, which, you know, is from a very different political agenda to Sadiq Khan. The other thing I think we've got to show briefly, much like with tobacco 80 or 100 years ago, we've got to show humility in the face of the future, because I'm certain we're going to have more respiratory illnesses as time goes on. We can't say everything is fine, we'll all have healthy lungs in 50 years' time. There'll be more horror stories about air quality and about respiratory.
What about the people who are going to die? What about the people who are going to die of hypothermia because they won't be able to heat their homes potentially? I mean, these swings and roundabouts in many ways, isn't it? Because the idea that by hurtling towards net zero there won't be consequences there in terms of people's health and well-being is naive.
I think that's a very fair point to end on. Thank you to my panel. Coming up, the victims of a shocking medical scandal continue in their fight for acknowledgement and compensation. We'll be hearing from one of them next.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Earlier in a House of Commons debate, the issue of the Primodos scandal was raised once again. The government was asked to accept the systemic regulatory failures behind the use of the birth control drug, accept responsibility, apologise and offer compensation. Primodos was a drug used in hormone-based pregnancy tests in the 60s and 70s. It detected pregnancy by inducing menstruation in women who were not pregnant, with the presence or absence of bleeding used to determine a pregnancy. It was first made available for sale in the UK in 1959, but withdrawn in 1978, following research in the late 60s that showed a link between use of the drug and severe birth defects. Legal action regarding these claims ended inconclusively in the 1980s, though compensation has been agreed in the United States. 5 decades on, families are still calling for acknowledgement of the government and the drug companies' responsibility and financial assistance to help them cope with the cost of children who are now my age who suffer as a result of these drugs' side effects. Theresa May had this to say in a powerful speech earlier in the Commons.
The final point I want to make is this, and it is a point that was made to me recently by Murray Lyon. It is that those women who took Primodos, who saw their children suffer, often feel guilty. They feel somehow it was them and their fault. It was not. They have no reason to feel guilty at all. This drug was given to them by their GPs. And I hope that the Minister will stand up this afternoon and say very clearly, the women who took Primodos, whose children suffered, were at no fault whatsoever and should not feel guilty at all. The fault lay with the NHS.
Joined now by Marie Lyon, who was personally affected by this scandal and has campaigned tirelessly for the cause. And indeed, Marie, you, along with Yasmin Qureshi, educated me on this issue, and I had a constituent that came to see me about it. Today's debate was very powerful. The case put across parties, the leader of the Lib Dems, a Labour MP, a former Conservative Prime Minister, arguing the case very strongly, but the government response is pretty weak.
It was as expected. I can't say that it was something that I felt was any different to the responses we've had before. It's just the party line. They continue to say this. Each time we try to bring this forward, each time we try to say, please look at the evidence, please look at the new science. But all we get each time is that there is no causal association. They're very well aware that there is no way that anyone can actually prove a causal association without the drug being given to a pregnant woman.
But we know perfectly well that pregnant women in the 60s and 70s took Primodos and then had babies who had serious problems. Would you like to talk about some of the cases that you know about?
Yes, absolutely. You have, well, one in particular has always stuck in my mind, and she'd had a baby, first baby, and they came in and said, we're really sorry, but your baby died. She said, and I thought, no, that's saw the baby being born. When her husband came in about 3 hours later, he just said, where's the baby? And she said, well, they took her away. She died straight away. And he said, well, where to? And he went outside the room to call a nurse. And when he went, there was a trolley. And on the trolley was a cloth. And he thought, what's under that? And when he pulled the cloth, it was his daughter. And she had been left on that trolley for all those hours, still alive, and she lived for 48 hours. But they buried their mistakes, and I'm sorry to say that that is the truth. It's not the first time. Another of our members, her baby died again, and on the death certificate it said, incompatible with life. Now, what an awful thing to have in your possession. So, but it's the other mothers for me as well that they just resonate with the stoic kind of acceptance that we all had to do at that time. This happened, you get on with it, you don't complain about it. But when you then find out that there was a reason for it, well, that's when you start to fight.
And some children have lived to my age and slightly more with serious physical and mental disabilities that are absolutely linked to taking this drug. There's no other reason that can be found for it.
There can't be any other reason because we have genetic testing. The genetic testing actually showed that there was no genetic fault. So for me, there was only one common denominator, and that was taking Primodos. The other problem is that now with the children, as they're getting older, they're getting more and more sick because the injuries that they actually had, a lot were internal injuries. So those internal injuries now are breaking down within the body. And we have lost 7 of our youngest members through the actual results of Primodos.
And I mentioned that in the US there's been a settlement. But the thing that strikes me as most significant is the cover-up that there's been, the secret documents that were found, but that this pill was used to procure abortions.
Yes, it was.
And it was also used to test for pregnancy.
Yes.
Now, no one can have thought using an abortion pill, 13 times stronger than a modern abortion pill, could be a safe thing.
No. But they always said that it had been tested. Well, I know that the tests were actually 1.5 years for one of them and a year for the other. And that was on animals, animal testing, which is fine, that's what happens. But the other tests that they did, the manufacturers did, they were hidden. So the documents I found in the archives in Berlin, there were 7,000 pages, and those 7,000 pages highlighted quite clearly that they were aware of the faults, but what they said was, we cannot afford to let this information out because it would affect the oral contraceptive pill. Because, of course, it was 40 times the strength of the oral contraceptive.
Pill. It is a most disgraceful story.
It's a shocking story.
And so sad for those families that
Dreadful.
now, 50 years on, they're still not getting the compensation and the support from the government that they need. Thank you, Marie. You are so brave to come on, and your campaigning has been remarkable. That's all from me for this week. And next up, it's Dan Wootton. Dan, what have you coming up on your programme?
Jacob, one word for you, Gaza. Did you see him today with Prince William, the big kiss? Well, Paul Gascoigne is going to reveal all about that extraordinary encounter with the future king.
Right, well, I'm not sure I know Mr. Gaza, but it'd be very interesting. Coming up after the weather, I'll be back on Monday at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Wells. The State of the Nation. It's going to be over 80 degrees in Somerset tomorrow. Bingo!
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Another warm night to come overnight with elevated temperatures for the time of year. More hot sunshine to come then into Friday. Not for everyone. There is a fair amount of medium and high-level cloud around, and there are some showers drifting north across Scotland and Northern Ireland overnight. Most of the rain not reaching the ground. These are relatively high-base showers, but could see some flashes of lightning as that clears away. Then for most places it's dry with clear spells. Some low cloud creeping into the east coast. But wherever you are, it's a warm night. A muggy feel, 18, 19, 20 Celsius in the south, mid to high teens in the north. And that sets us off for a warm start to Friday. Still some of that low cloud and mist around the east coast, but it tends to retreat during the morning to the immediate beaches. And there'll be some low cloud creeping around the southwestern coast as well, with the potential for some showers to turn up later here. Otherwise, for many, it's bright skies and another hot day. Mid to high 20s widely, 30 or 31 Celsius in the south and southeast. Then into Saturday, it's another warm start to the day. Plenty of sunshine from the word go, especially towards the east and the south. A change on the way, though, for the north and northwest. Northern and western Scotland see some showers and some cooler air later. That spreads across the northern half of the country on Sunday, clearing elsewhere on Monday.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.